everyone to show up to win. I'm so excited. I This is the first guest that I'll be recording where I wasn't aware of her beforehand, before the podcast. But my goodness, when you find the right people and when God just crosses paths with the correct people, I just knew I really wanted her on the show. So it's my pleasure and honor to introduce going to be one of the most exciting guests that I've had on a podcast. She is the States of America's Mrs. Texas, Elaine Mingus. Welcome, Elaine.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Just when I saw you were looking to be a guest, I had to reach out. I just, something resonated with me that I had to like get to know you and get to know the story behind you. And so just for the listeners, just take a few minutes, let them get a better idea of who Elaine Mingus is, and then we'll just have a short conversation.
Sure. So my name is Elaine Mingus, United States of America's Mrs. Texas. I am a proud mother of 7 beautiful children, ages 21 to 7 years old. Me and my husband have been married 22 years. I am a believer and an entrepreneur and a pageant queen and a public speaker. So just kind of a little bit of everything. And I'm so honored to be on the show.
Absolutely. So first of all, 7 kids. How do you how do you manage that part with the busy pageantry?
Yeah, I would like to know that myself. Honestly, it's just I spent a lot of years in the background trying to do what I'm doing today. And it was a season where I just poured into them and equipped them with the ability to be autonomous and fly on their own. And so, with a husband that's super supportive and a family that is, we've got our rhythm and our cadence down, I'm able to do a lot of things now that I wasn't able to do 20 years ago when I was first starting.
Okay, so let's talk about just the beginning. How did you get into pageants? I feel, so just to let you know, is one of the things that I tell people is I feel there's this thing in between the 1 and 8 year old range where there's something where it gives you a passion that you just take on with your life. And sometimes we even forget about that. Was there anything that you would say that started that?
From when I was really little, is that what you're asking? Yeah.
Yes.
So, yeah, absolutely. So I always wanted to be a storyteller. From when I was very young, I was writing little stories about Easter bunnies when I was in second grade. And that passion of storytelling is really what has led me on this entire journey. And so I wanted to be a writer and communicator. And so I went to school at UT. But before that, some really tragic things happened, which really kind of put some stunting in my growth. But once that all cleared up, I heard a pageant queen say, if you have a story to share, put on a crown and a sash and people will start paying attention. And that's exactly what I did. So I'm able to share my story, which was tragedy to triumph, and all the little bits in between, the things that I know as a mom and entrepreneur. So that is kind of a little bit of how I began. But at the end of the day, I believe that the greatest story, other than the one that Jesus dying on the cross, the greatest story we could ever tell is our own.
Absolutely. And the thing is especially when you have a resilient story, so those people are able to learn it through you and not actually have to go through it. And so I know that there's a ton of resilience that you've faced or adversity that you faced to be that resilient person. Can you kind of shine a light on just the aspects that you feel, that you're led to share? I don't want to get into, anything that like you feel uncomfortable, like, and I know you're very comfortable, but I just want to let you know, like, that's very important, is to keep that comfort level for you. Cause I know there's so much, but I feel like there's so many people and these listeners that they really need to hear your story.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. And my story starts mostly when me and my family moved outside of Houston to a small Texas town, and everything was going great. My dad had a company. My mom was PTA president, and we were going to a church. And what we didn't know was that the youth pastor of that church was grooming not only me, but multiple other girls in the youth group. And when it was found out, my mom, of course, took me to the lead pastor to be like, what is going on? The moment we walked in, the lead pastor said, he's confessed. We know exactly what's happened. We believe she seduced him. I was 13 years old. I was still playing Barbies. I was still watching cartoons. And back in the 90s, grooming wasn't a term that we really used. And so I didn't understand the complexity that is somebody who takes their position of authority and uses it to their own sick advantage. And so I believed him. I said, okay, I must have done something wrong to deserve this. And, unlike the movies where it's this violent act where, the woman doesn't want it, grooming is a whole different mindset where someone makes you feel important. And so I just said, well, of course, like I must have, I did this. And so it's my fault. And my mom was like, do you want to go to the police? And I said, absolutely not. I am so embarrassed. We live in a small town. And so I took all of that blame and I buried it as far down as I possibly could. And it came up in the form of an 8-year long battle with bulimia, which eventually culminated in a almost daily heroin addiction that almost took my life. I one day, praise the Lord, walked into a church and I was radically saved and never the same again. What happened soon after is that very same man was employed by a Christian girls' school as a volleyball coach and was convicted of his quote unquote first offense 10 years after the fact. And so I tried to then use my voice to go forward and say, hey, this is not his first offense. And was essentially told that that family has too much clout in this community and we can no longer move forward with this case because the girls that had also experienced it were living in the community, didn't want to, speak out, which is understandable. That's their right to not want to speak out. But it took me having 7 kids, 5 of them being girls, being in the church on a regular basis to say, you know what, it's time to stand up. And so the average age of disclosure is 52. The median age is 48 years old. And so at 44, I pretty much fit the bill of now I found my voice. I've gone to Washington, D.C. to speak on behalf of sexual violence survivors everywhere. And it is time to share my story, get it out there so that other people can realize that there's freedom and that they don't have to stay in the dark.
Yeah. Elaine, that is an incredible journey. I can't even imagine how you would feel at, first of all, that age. So I have a niece who's 14. I can't imagine. And the other thing is, I'm from a small town too, so I know how that aspect would be. And I know a lot of my listeners are from, some small town areas. So in that time of just being a teenager, how confusing was it? It would be the first question. Also, you were basically having to take the blame where you weren't in the wrong. And so how did that impact you? And I know that caused the bulimia, in your opinion. Just take me back to that part and just break it down for the listeners a little bit. And I really appreciate you for being this transparent.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a hard moment because when it was found out by my dad and he, did not probably respond the way that he would have liked to respond or how he would respond today. Given the limited information that he had at that moment and then that we had as a society, you know, he added to that shame because he just, all he knew is that he had found his daughter in a precarious situation and he didn't clock the guy. He, politely asked him to leave and then, proceeded to like berate me with 1,000 different questions. And that, kind of signified that this is my fault. Instead of, I mean, now when he talks about it, he's like, I should have, like, he was a grown man. Like, I should have, like, decked him. But, when you're in that situation as a parent, like now I can see like no one gives you a guideline on how to be a parent and how to deal with those really awful situations. Like some of the things that you're like, you know, would hate to see your children get into and be face to face with that. And so I have a lot of grace for him, but that little girl inside of me really felt responsible for something that really she would never have initiated. She would have never thought, that was even possible. And, I remember talking recently to a pastor's wife, and she says it's completely normal and natural for a young girl to be attracted to her coach, her teacher, her youth. What's not normal is for a grown man in a position of authority to take advantage of that. And so, now that I have a name and I have a voice for it, that it's called grooming, I can rectify some of those feelings. But, I just, as especially at the age of, I have, I have 5 girls, and we've gone through a lot of like 11, 12, 13-year old. And that age is such a precarious age anyhow for a young girl. And the relationship between a father and a daughter during that time is kind of this weird moment where they're trying to be a woman and they're still a little girl, and the dad is like he's trying to grapple with the fact that like, here's my beautiful baby girl, and she's starting to like be somebody who like it's scary because how do I protect this person who is no longer a child? She's turning into a young woman. I think that is a very difficult place to be for both parties. And so all I wanted as a little girl was to be wrapped in my dad's arms, for him to say, I'm so sorry this happened. Let me protect you. Let me fight for you. And I didn't get that. And so for my entire, teenage years, I was looking for that person that would go out and protect me and to speak for me and to, tell me that I was valuable and okay. And so that is, what essentially what happened, and which what got me into that kind of pattern of bad behavior where I'm trying to like physically be this like ideal perfection body by being really thin. It was Kate Moss era. It was, very waifish, twiggy era. And so that was what was considered valuable for society and acceptable. And so, and then, when I got to, that I achieved that goal and realized it wasn't good enough, then maybe I will be accepted if I do this or I do this. And then it was like, well, if I can't be accepted or feel that like internal significance deep down, then I'm going to mask the pain with drugs and alcohol. And so, I did that, and I did it to an extreme. And luckily, God saved me from all of that. And once I saw the light that was available, then it was easy for me to just turn, do a 180 the other direction.
Right. I I believe that's also how life prepared you to be able to teach this lesson that you're teaching all these wonderful people now. Uh, and it's definitely not easy and definitely not simple. But it's like you said, you as a parent, you understand it now in a better aspect. But also, I feel spiritually you've jumped up levels because the what you were looking for as a young girl, you found that spiritually. And so the I feel like you covered the bulimia. I feel like that was the masking agent. That's with the drugs and alcohol. It really was that part of you that was missing with the father part, and to find that spiritually. There's so many people that go through stuff. So in my experience, my grandmother passed away. So it was my first time dealing with death. I quit playing basketball. Like, why would I quit the thing I love the most? And so I think that's part of it, is that we're looking for these solutions, and the root cause is the spirituality part. So can you tell me a little bit about just that experience for you? I think that's so important, and I'm so glad you brought that up. But you're so willing to talk about it because sometimes people don't want to talk about their spirituality just because of just some people believe different ways.
Yeah, yeah. I love talking about my faith because it is the reason why I exist. It's the reason why I was born. It's the reason why I'm still here. And so one day I decided, like, I was writing, like I said, I was a storyteller, and I was writing a book, and I just thought, okay, I've got to be like a good writer. Like this, they like good writers go do research. And it was kind of like an apocalyptic book. So I thought, well, I've got to go get a Bible. Little did I know that God had used this deep desire to be a storyteller to push me into his story. And so I went to a church and I was dressed like the bride of Satan. I had a black leather bodice, a black giant long floor length tutu, a black veil, blood red lipstick. I just thought I was being cute. I didn't realize that I looked like the bride of Satan walking into this church one Tuesday afternoon, demanding a Bible from two little old ladies who went back to oblige into the back together. I'm assuming for security purposes. They didn't want to be left alone with this crazy looking girl. And they came back with a Bible. But during that moment when they were gone, I went up to the chapel doors and I shook them because they were locked. And I thought, that's like, that shouldn't be like there. Why is the church locked? It should be open. And so when they came back, I like demanded, like, I want to get into the chapel. And they looked at me suspiciously, probably thinking I was going to do some kind of seance or sacrifice. And they just said, well, why do you need to go in? And from like the cornerstone of who I am, this guttural cry came out. And I just said, I need to pray. And so they opened up the church doors, and I saw this beautiful wooden crucifix of Jesus hanging there. And at the very moment that I knew I was a sinner and had done all these things, not including the sexual abuse, but all the other things from them that were my choice, my coping mechanisms, that God had washed those away. And so the very moment that I knew I was a sinner, I knew I was saved, and everything that I had ever done wrong was washed away by the work of the cross. And I just walked in and I knew I was home. And so I sat in the church for another 2 hours and just cried and prayed and read the Bible that they gave me, and went home after that and just immediately started trying to tell people about Jesus. And I went to a coffee shop here in Austin and was ordering my latte, trying to like tell them about the real Jesus, not this church Jesus, not this religious Jesus that I had even grown up in the church to kind of like, it's he's there and I'm here. I was like, no, the one that met me just now, that saved me from everything and answered all my questions I didn't even know I was asking, that Jesus. And they were like, just take your latte and go. And so I went outside the coffee shop and I found this homeless guy in Austin. And we sat on, he's an older guy, and we sat on the hillside, and he just told me how God had intervened constantly in his life, whether it be just by giving him the food he needed or the shelter he needed. And he was like, I know God because he shows up in my daily life as somebody who lives on the streets. And that's when I realized, like, he gets it. And I've been trying to help people understand that from that moment, and then searching and finding my people in my tribe who really understand that God is not a God that is far away. He is close and he is ready to help.
I love that. I love the fact that part of the story is you knew what your sole purpose was. You went there even though you didn't know, and then that journey opened up this whole big huge door. So those two wonderful ladies that gave you the Bible, and even though that they were quote unquote, probably scared because of what you look like, right? But they looked past the stereotype, and then they addressed your needs. And so I think that's so important, Elaine, is that people understand sometimes it's not about us. Like, it's never about us, really. It's about the people that we come across. So many people do things for others, but there's a, I wouldn't say a selfish motive, but there's a motive behind it of like, hey, how, what am I getting? Like I'm giving to receive, or I'm receiving to give. I think there's a part of that, but those ladies, like they opened up to you, and then they gave you this brand new chapter of your life, and then the other aspect of it being someone who you would not expect to be the other person to like solidify your foundation. And so the one question I have is, going back to the place that had given you such heartache, how did you put the faith to go through the one part of the story that was always prevalent, just being the church? There's so many people being church hurt. I think that's so. I would love for you to address it, and also like you're just going to help so many people. I'm so happy that you're doing this interview.
Thank you. I mean, it was just honestly God from the very beginning. Me realizing that the person who had hurt me was just a human. It wasn't God. It wasn't indicative of his nature. It wasn't even the church as a whole. I mean, obviously, I mean, it ruined our family. Not only did we leave the church, my parents' marriage fell apart, in part probably because we weren't, walking in our faith, and that we had had this, traumatic situation happen. But I always knew that God was a good God, and that he didn't cause it, that it was just people being people. And, my dad and my mom, their faith was still there throughout that whole thing. It wasn't a very cornerstone part of who they were anymore. And it wasn't until I came to faith that my whole family actually came back to the church. And now we're all, walking with God very closely. My entire family, I have a sister, and my mom and my dad, and then they're my step parents. They all are very close to God, and we share that, and I'm thankful for that, because that it really could have had a different outcome. We could have all turned away. We could all be, turning to alcohol and drugs and all the things that don't ever satisfy. And so that was just, and I've had so many good experiences and bad experiences still in the church. And it really is a matter of just being logical and saying every organization, whether it be the church, the government, the school, the family unit, there are bad seeds, bad apples in every single part of that. And to think that the church is exempt because it's supposed to be this picture of God is foolish. Like, people will always be people. And the Bible says that where there is no oxen, the pen is clean, meaning that there's nothing in the stables, there's no mess. As soon as you put the thing that was meant to be in the stable, which is animals, as soon as you put people into this world, which was what the world was created for, is the moment that it becomes messy. And so just to realize that that's just part of life, and our job in this broken world is to make the best of it, and to know that this is not our home, and that one day we will graduate to a home where there is no tears and there is no hurt and pain.
Yeah, I love your perspective on it. Um, so my next question is going to be about just the pageantry, but also, so I'm a firm believer of like anything negative, you got to have the positive spin on it. And so, and I know there's a lot of positive things that are going on. So like, I wanted to give the people some of the negative to see how resilient you are. But the rest of the podcast, I really want to focus on the positive stuff, the way you've up spiraled through this whole thing, because I think that's the most miraculous part. And so I know you're a writer. I've read your blogs. They're amazing. And then you can tell a little bit about why you've deleted the blogs if you want. But that's the things is like, and then, your entrepreneur part. So I just want to let you just tie in some of this stuff and then we can ask some questions about it. But I feel, you know, I feel it's very important just to make sure we have a very positive spin on a very negative start. And so how did you get into pageantry, and how did you become the United States of America Mrs. Texas?
Yeah. So it all does kind of tie into the moments where I, decided to give up and delete my blog, not tell my story anymore, which just came after, spending so much time trying to get my message out there. And I had finally decided, after having so many kids, and I decided to re enter the workforce and do what I wanted to do, which was journalism. And I got in 4 interviews and then flown up to New York, November 2019, for a very prestigious news organization. Thanksgiving time, November 19th, I think, I got the call. You didn't get the job. And I was so heartbroken. And because I had thought, these are my people. This is where, like, finally, like, I'm going to get my big break. And once that happened, I was like, nope, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't want to share my story. Similar to one of the prophets in the Bible, he said, I'm never going to talk about it again. And for a couple years, I did. I just was like, anytime I'd feel that like niggling in my heart, like, you need to share your story, I was like, nope, I'm not doing it. And so after that, turning off my blog, just deleting that whole part of my life where I'm sharing my testimony and my faith, I started selling stuff I found on the side of the road. We were $10,000 in debt from a vacation that we had taken as a family. We don't have tons of money, so we were just putting it on the credit card, came back to that credit card bill, got very depressed very quickly, saw some stuff on the side of the road, started picking it up, selling it, could have been igloo containers, bikes, whatever. And within 6 months, paid off $10,000 worth of debt, just selling things off the side of the road on Facebook Marketplace. And I thought, okay, I like could do this like for a job. And a couple things happened that were just divine coincidences, and switched over to vintage furniture. And I've always loved vintage furniture. I've always loved, I'm a farmer's granddaughter. So I grew up with stories of my mom talking about how she spent time with her father, who was a Depression era farmer, straightening bent nails. So kind of that waste not, want not. As a mom with, a family of 9, there is no, if you didn't eat it for breakfast, it's coming for lunch. And if you didn't eat it for lunch, it's coming for dinner. Like, we do not waste food around here. And so it just really resonated with who I was. And then the kind of like fashion and vogueness of vintage furniture. And so I just went full force into that and opened up an e-commerce store in 2022. And so I'd gone through the pandemic, selling furniture, which was, its own miracle, because it put us in a place where we were actually making money, where everybody else was wondering where their next paycheck was coming from. And everybody was redoing their homes. And I had all this furniture to sell that I'd found on the side of the road. And so I shifted to the vintage furniture, opened up an e-commerce store January 2022. By January 2023, within the first e-commerce year, I had cleared $105,000 worth of income and sales. And so I, with very little overhead. And so I was just like, oh, like, this is crazy. Like, we have never had, money. We've never been able to afford trips and, things. And so I was traveling. I was picking up furniture, vintage furniture at different places around Texas, and bringing it back to Austin and fixing it up and repairing it, which I felt like had a very meaningful purpose, because it was like, you're finding these treasures that are kind of broken down and you're repairing them. And it kind of just felt like in line with who I was, that I was broken down and God had come in and repaired me. And here I was doing it for furniture. And then I was being invited into these very sacred spaces of people's homes to deliver furniture and talk to them, and be invited into places in people's homes that I would have never seen at the church. I'd never stepped foot inside of a church, telling them my story, getting to know them as people first. And because of the financial stability that we had during that time, I decided to go to this conference, and I had not wanted to go to this conference, but I had kind of had this like feeling like I should, because it was a speakers conference. And I was like, Lord, I don't do that anymore. I don't share my story. I don't know what you're trying to do. In fact, every single time that I would, I felt like the Lord was telling me like, hey, I want you to share your story. I would like put my hand over my head and I would say, no, I don't do that. I just sell vintage furniture. And so I, you know, went forward into this conference, and like just everything started to fall into place. Right after this conference, I thought, okay, I'm going to go to this other conference. It was a women's conference. It wasn't like a speakers conference. And Miss America was there. And she said, put on a crown and a sash, and you'll be able to be invited into places you normally wouldn't be able to be invited to, and share your story, even your story of faith, like, schools and stuff like this. And I said, okay, you got my attention, God. This is like what I want to do. And I feel like you're building something up, but I'm not going to build it. You're going to have to build it. The next week, I went into another business conference that was not about, anything like that. And Mrs. Universe was there. And I've never met a pageant girl in my entire life. I'm 42 years old. And she said the same thing. She said, you could be sharing your story, but if you put on a crown and a sash, for some reason, people will pay attention. And that's when I was like, okay, you got my attention. I'm going to do it. And so that's when I first signed up to run in pageants.
That's that's incredible. So one thing that you've said, I just want to, so like it's with that whole thing of one person's trash is the other person's treasure. It just depends on where you're at, where your value is. And so I love the fact that you've noticed this and created a business out of it. And I believe you said you were $10,000 in debt, and then you're like, oh, and then you just decided, hey, look at the side of the road and look at different things and being able to flip it. Um, I am not sure that most people without some type of entrepreneurial spirit would be able to do it. And I'm just saying, like from the beginning. And so I think that my hats off to you for that, right? But what it did was it opened up that door to the pageantry, because you probably wouldn't have been at that conference. Miss America wouldn't have been there. And then the next one you went to, Miss Universe. Can't imagine getting that type of message, getting that type of tap on my shoulder of like, hey, um, Elaine, I think you need to be uh, going to the pageantry part. And so how was that message like received? Because I feel like a lot of times we feel God tells us stuff, and we're like, I don't want to do that, or I don't feel I'm capable of doing it. And here's something where you're just like, okay, here's a way to get my story out. And so just kind of take me from there.
Yeah. So, despite the crown, the sash, the makeup, the false lashes, like I am, a vintage furniture girl. I wear my ski bibs. I like don't wear makeup. I pull down, pull my hair back in a ponytail, put on yoga pants. Like that, it was, and especially after having kids for so many years and just kind of living in that, like, where I'm just getting through the day to day, it was a big change for me, and a good change because I think it allowed me to you know, regain that person inside of me that did, love fashion, loved, things that were, beautiful and fun and girly. And so it allowed me to just kind of go, okay, wait, Elaine, there's this other part of you that, as being a mom, that you have maybe given up, that's been dormant and that needs to be shored up. And so I think that's definitely something pageantry has given me that I didn't really understand until much later. And then, I didn't want to do it because I had spent so many years trying to get my message out in my own strength. And so that's really was the challenge to God. Like, Lord, if you want me to do this, it's got to be all you. I am sick of hustling. I know how easy the vintage furniture has been. It was like butter. Like I didn't have to try at all. It all came to me, and I was like, that's the spirit. That's the thing I want for this, because I'm not getting back on that hamster wheel again and trying to build my own kingdom. Like, we're building your kingdom and you're going to have to do the heavy lifting because I can't do any more lifting. I've got too much on my plate. And so people literally, the moment that I said, yes, God, I'll do this, but you're going to do it. They started sending me money to don't, cause pageantry is not a cheap hobby. And so, it was like a $600 or $700 entry fee that was paid for by a sponsor. People were contacting me on their own. Like, I was getting messages on DMs on Instagram saying, hey, I just really like your story. What can I do to sponsor you? And I was like, okay, this is really bizarre. Like, this is so stupid easy. And, to the point where, I had 80 people show up at a fundraiser at a mansion that I did not pay for, that had a guitar shaped pool. I had motorcycle sponsors that, they were like, we're going to hang these motorcycles from the ceiling of this mansion. And I was like, there was a charcuterie board that was probably $1,000 worth of food that I didn't even set up. And, just seeing the community come around and support me in my message really did make me realize, wow, this is what it feels like when God is in something. It is not me hustling, trying to figure out how to like finagle my way into sharing my story or getting out there. The funny thing is that I thought, okay, well, all this stuff is happening. Obviously, like, God has set it up that I'm going to win, because that sounds the most legit understanding of like what's going on.
Yep.
And
So
that first time,
hold
yeah.
on. So one thing I just want to point out is it's amazing when you're in the season of allow and not how. When you are worried about the logistics, that's why a lot of people do not get anywhere, is because they're worried about, oh, I got to do this. I got to catch a flight here. I got to do this. Like, when you just say, hey, I want to be present. If I'm supposed to be here, I'll get there. And I know that from my part of my life. And so just to hear your part of the story where all these people just started showing up for you, and being on the podcast of Show Up to Win. Show Up to Win is about showing up with intention. It doesn't mean showing up with all the answers. And so how are you feeling when all that was happening? I mean, I know, hey, this is God. This is what I've been reading about in the Bible. But this is where I'm actually seeing it in my life. Can you just give me a glimpse of how that felt? But I know for the listeners, I felt that when the basketball stuff happened. So I didn't have an opportunity, and somehow this miraculous opportunity just poof. So how are you feeling? Like, where, I know you were on cloud nine, but you're also very humble, because that's what Christian people do.
Yeah, I was very much like, okay, this is all awesome. I love this. And when I went to the first pageant, I didn't even make semifinals. And so that was a huge blow to my ego, to what I thought God was building. But I'm so glad I didn't win. Number one, because I learned way more from losing than I ever could have from winning. But it really taught me not to put expectation on what God is doing, to be very open handed and be like, okay, Lord, you're building something and this part is working and it's looking really good. And I think it's going to go this way. But, as Paul and all the apostles said, like, if it be the will of the Lord, then we'll go to such and such. We'll go to Thessalonica. We'll go through, to Rome. But not to put any kind of, status on the actual destination, knowing that the journey is really the best part and that God is working out all these things. And so, I was very disappointed after I didn't win. But now looking back, I go, I get it now. I get it. And it's wonderful when, things are going your way, but then suddenly when that like hard stop, and it's like, wait, this is not going the way that I wanted it to go. And then having to give back that control, because you don't realize you kind of slowly start taking that control back as you're going through the motions. You're like, oh, I know, I got this. I know what we're doing now. And then God's like, no, 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 you still don't know where we're going and you're rowing us in the wrong direction. Let me readjust. And so I did. And one of the biggest things that I felt after losing was I had this revert to who I was before, where I was like trying to hustle. I was trying to get it to work the way that I wanted it to work. And that's when, I mean, it like every single thing that was like on, like happening so smoothly just like came to a crashing halt. And it was like me having to go, okay, I give it back up. Here are the reins again. No, no expectations. God, do what you want.
The ego came in, and here's the thing is like I think people misconceptualize ego and think that that's a bad thing. And ego is actually really good because it's the one thing that we know keeps us safe, but it's something that we know we can count on. And so, outside of, but that's the thing is like we get to that point where things are going so smoothly and we're just like, okay, I can take it from here. And then it's like, no, hit the brakes, pal. Like your ego's kind of getting in the way. And so, what would be the one lesson that you learned through losing? And so I tell people all the time in the game of life, like you might just run out of time with less points, but that doesn't mean that it's a loss. It's a lesson. You can take that loss because I hate the word failure. Failure doesn't exist in my vocabulary. But that's the thing is like I feel like people will say, "Oh, you failed." No, I didn't fail. I'm learning a lesson, and then that's what's going to make me be able to rebuild and get better. So, what would be the one takeaway from the loss, other than the fact that your ego kind of stepped up?
Yeah. So there's a story that I like to tell. When I was in sixth grade, I entered an art contest. And through this whole situation with the pageantry, I learned that there's always moments when you don't know what's going to happen, but that doesn't mean, like you said, that you've lost. You're just learning something new. And so in sixth grade, there was an art contest. I entered the art contest, brought the poster board back to school. Everybody was like, you absolutely are going to win. It was for a book fair for like a $25 gift card in the book fair. And so when the principal got on the loudspeaker and he said, third place winner, not my name. Fine. I didn't want third place winner. Second, not my name. But when he announced first place winner, he didn't say my name. And I was like, I didn't even make third place. Like, what's going on? And it's that moment, that moment where you're not sure that a lot of us, we live in this moment a lot of our lives. And suddenly the principal said, and the grand prize winner is, and he said my name. At sixth grade, I didn't know there was any such thing as a grand prize. All I knew was third, second, first. And that moment that the curtains closed on me, that first pageant, I heard God speak. This is that moment, that in-between moment. And I promise, I have a grand prize for you. It's just not this. And so in that moment, that the thing that I learned the most is that failure, or what looks like failure, is just the pause, the breath before the big success. And to always look at those pauses as just a reset moment, and knowing that, like, okay, again, give up control. I don't know. I don't even know what I don't know. And God does.
I love it. And so, what was your mentality about when you decided to re-enter? Like, what sparked that to be like, okay, I didn't even place, like, those type of feelings, because you do have the ego part, right? Um, what part of it was like, okay, I want to do this again?
So I think when you go into something new, you think, it's like when you have your first kid, you're like, oh, I'm an expert parent. And then you have your second kid and you're like, I have no clue what I'm doing. And so, I went into my second pageant with knowing, okay, I kind of know what I'm doing, but I don't really know what I'm doing. But I kept showing up more and more authentically who I was created to be. The first pageant, I was feeling like, oh, I've got to look a certain way. I've got to act a certain way. And it was like, no, 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 no. You need to be Elaine. You need to be exactly who I created you to be. And so that second pageant, I went in and I was like, okay, I'm going to be me completely. And I got there a little bit, and maybe I was a little less refined. Like I was me, but I was without the refinement. And so the third pageant I went in, and I was a little bit more like me with a little bit more refinement. And that third pageant, I placed third runner up. And then, but then it's always about like it's a timing thing. Is it your time? Is there still little edges of your personality and of how you're approaching things that need to be shorn off? And so I went into another pageant and didn't really, want to win. We weren't at a financial place, that we could have won and gone to a national pageant. Went in, and my friend won. Actually a sponsor of mine decided, oh, I'm gonna run in a pageant. And so she won. I got third runner up again, and she won. And I was totally fine with not winning because, again, it was an expensive pageant. We weren't there. But I went back to my hotel room and I said, Lord, I'm fine with not winning, but I'm just curious. Here's this person, and they won their first pageant. And I've been doing this. This is my fourth pageant. What's going on? Like, do you have a place for me? What is my purpose in this? Is my purpose only to be like a connector? Like, was my purpose so that she could win and she could go on and do great things? But I want to do great things for you in your name. Please, can you just peel back the layers and show me what you're doing? And of course, I'm saying this in the shower. My makeup is like, I'm crying my makeup off, not because I didn't win, but because I felt this loss of, are you going to use me, Lord? This loss of purpose and the sense of like what I'm doing with my life. And so my husband had borrowed a suit from her husband. So I said, hey, I'm going to take this suit back to your hotel room so I can, so you can take it home. And she invites me into her hotel room, and I'm like, I'm so excited that you won. We had kind of met just happenstance. She wasn't a believer. She was coming out of divorce, and she decided, to run because I had kept saying, like, I'm doing this for God. And so I'm just like, gosh, it's just so weird how we met and how all this happened. And now you're, she was Mrs. Texas International. And she looked at me straight in the eye and she said, Elaine, it's amazing. It's amazing what God has done in my life. But did you know you're the reason that I'm following Christ today? And it just hit me. I have been working so hard for this physical crown, for this idea of like, oh, I'm going to be royalty in here and now. And God was like, no. I peeled back the layers. This is what you're doing. You're building an eternal kingdom where moth and rust do not destroy. And this girl, before she ever met me, and we met through pageantry, just at a conference, she wasn't following me. She was going through a divorce. She wasn't a Christian. And through my experiences with her, she started following Jesus. And I was like, okay, God. I started calling myself the Susan Lucci of pageantry. I was just like, if you want me to lose 1,000 times over, so be it. If this is what it's about, because I want to bring people into the kingdom. I want to set people free, bring light to the darkness. And I get it. And then I entered the next pageant, fully showed up exactly who I was. No, I wanted to win, but just again, no agenda. And that's the pageant I won.
That's amazing. For the people, for some of the listeners that don't know about Susan Lucci, so she had been up for this award like I forgot how many
40
times.
like 20 years, like something like that.
It was a long period of time, and she lost with grace every time. She was just like, okay. She was like, maybe next year, and it was
Maybe.
like, yeah. And honestly, I think sometimes they wouldn't choose her just because of just how remarkable it was that she lost. I think, no, I'm not gonna say I think. I believe that when you are able to really connect people with your heart, God can use you in such amazing ways. And all of those people, Elaine, that you met in I would say a cutthroat type competition most of the time, right? And you showed them a different side. I think that was part of it. And then I think also was like you said, um, you're already the queen of that kingdom already, you know? So when we walk like that, when we walk with what our inheritance really is, how much power did that give you?
Yeah. I mean, I know that this is the moment for me. There's no shadow in my, doubt in my mind that this is my moment, and I am taking every single opportunity to share my story. I don't take this crown for granted. I only have a year to do this. And so I am running full force with the support of my husband and my family in this moment. And it's, there are moments when I'm very tired and, all of this, but knowing that I'm in my moment and that this is my season keeps me going. It keeps me pushing towards God, asking God, please show up here. Help me to not be a hustler. Help me to be somebody who's just led by your spirit all the time. And so I love the moment that I'm living in, but I know it's just a moment. And just like any other person that has like a, one hit, like these one hit wonders, or even people like, I think about Taylor Swift, and I think, is in her, she has her moment, but what happens when somebody else gets their moment and she's, off in the background again? Is she going to be okay with waiting again? And is she going to use all that time to, build a new moment for her, a new momentum and a new message? And it's like always being grateful for the moment that you're in, but then also knowing that this too shall pass, whether it be sad or happy, and that every moment is a blessing in its own way, and every moment has its own flow and excitement about it. If you can really, grab hold and be in the here and now, and be where your feet are planted, and be happy where your feet are.
Yeah, I think the part that most people don't, they really don't understand, the present really is the gift. Like it really, I mean, it is in that word. It is there. It is that box with the bow on it, but most people are looking past it. They're either looking for the destination or, they're looking to the past. And that's the reason that they're not paying attention to it. Um, so Elaine, where can people find you? Because I know the listeners are going to want to know more about you and see how they can support you. So
Yeah. So I have a website called ElaineMingus.com, and it only has 3 blogs on it. It doesn't have 10 years worth of blogs like my other one did. But they're blogs that really kind of are my heart, are really where I want to be. And they're very vulnerable. And then there are also my courses are on there, and downloads and podcasts that I've done for Curb Vulture, or for, like podcasts like this. And so I'll be building that up more in the days to come. And then and that's just ElaineMingus.com, or you can find me at USOA Mrs. MRS Texas on Instagram. You can also look up my name, Elaine Mingus, on Instagram and find me there, or Curb Vulture, if you are into vintage furniture. And there's gonna be a lot of changes coming up, because I'm gonna be continuing to share my story, and my platform is called Flipping the Script: The Power of Storytelling. So I'm going to be creating something very soon where I am empowering, even more so than I am now, people to share their stories more effectively, potentially using pageantry to do so, but making sure that they can have a platform and a voice to share their messages.
I love it. I mean, so I listened to the Curb Vulture podcast and I don't know anything about vintage furniture, but it was very enlightening. But it was just like, I felt like I was a part of the family. So I love what you were doing there. I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you're doing, and love to have you as a guest on another episode at some point. I just want to say thank you so much for giving me your time and sharing these stories. And I know you're just going to help so many people. And, congratulations on your achievement. It's very well deserved. But I also say that because when great people get accomplishments. I feel sometimes that people don't celebrate it enough. And I, I really, really want you to know that, like, celebrate this thing, enjoy this year reign, and look at all the lives when you get a chance to look at it from, you know, a scrapbook and see all the wonderful things and the people that you were able to bless, to just get to know a little glimpse of Elaine Mingus. So, but again, thank you, and thank you so much for the listeners for giving us the time, and I'm looking forward to sharing more stories with you with a great, incredible guest like Elaine.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I just, it was a blessing to be here and share my story. And good luck on all the things that you're going to be doing.
Thank you so much. And so, my message is to tell people all the time, don't just show up. Actually show up to win. Show up with the intention of actually doing something with some type of purpose for some type of impact. Thanks again.